My name is Eleanor Williams. I'm 70 years old, and on my birthday, my only son and his wife abandoned me in a nursing home. Little did they know, they had just handed me the keys to their destruction, because I secretly owned the entire facility. This is the story of how it happened. It's a difficult story to tell, but I feel like it needs to be told. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It makes me feel a little less alone knowing there are kind hearts out there. Okay, here we go. The silence in the car was heavier than a tombstone. It was a suffocating, deliberate silence, the kind that speaks louder than any argument, a thick blanket of unspoken words. Outside my window, the world was a blur of autumn colors, the fiery reds and brilliant golds of a perfect October day. My 70th birthday, a milestone that should have been marked by laughter, by the messy joy of grandchildren with sticky fingers, by a cake overloaded with candles threatening to set off the smoke alarm. Instead, it was defined by the low, monotonous hum of a luxury sedan's engine and the chilling betrayal that hung in the air between the three of us. My son, Richard, kept his eyes glued to the road, his knuckles a stark white against the supple black leather of the steering wheel. He wore a new tie, a silk thing in a shade of cobalt blue that was supposed to convey power and confidence. I knew it was new because I knew his entire wardrobe, a closet I had curated and funded over the years, from his first ill-fitting interview suit out of college to the crisp shirts he wore to his last failed business pitch. He was a man playing the part of success, using my money as his costume. Beside him, his wife, Vanessa, fiddled with the gold clasp on her designer handbag, a recent purchase, I was sure. The clicking sound was a tiny, irritating metronome, counting down the minutes to my disposal. She'd occasionally glance back at me in the rearview mirror, her lips curved into a tight, sympathetic smile that never came close to reaching her cold, calculating eyes. "It's a beautiful place, Eleanor," she said, her voice as smooth and polished as the expensive pearls at her throat. "Top-of-the-line care. We looked everywhere. We wanted only the absolute best for you." I didn't answer. I just held her gaze in the mirror until she looked away. I studied her flawless makeup, a carefully constructed mask that couldn't quite hide the avarice flickering in the depths of her gaze. I'd seen that look before. I saw it the Christmas she'd admired my mother's diamond earrings, her compliments lingering a little too long, her fingers tracing their shape in the air. I saw it every time Richard's latest brilliant startup idea required a sudden and substantial cash infusion, an inheritance he was trying to claim before I was even gone, an investment I was assured would double in a year but that had vanished into the thin air of his incompetence. I may have been 70, but my mind was as sharp as it had been 30 years ago, when I'd stood in a dusty, empty warehouse and envisioned the first Golden Years facility. I was not a fool. I had felt the atmospheric shift in my own home for months, a slow, creeping cold front, the hushed conversations that would abruptly cease the moment I entered a room, the sudden intense interest in my financial affairs, clumsily disguised as daughterly concern about my future. "Are you sure your will is up to deep, Eleanor? These things can get so complicated." And then there was the campaign of a single word: forgetful. It was their weapon of choice, wielded with casual cruelty. If I misplaced my reading glasses, it was, "See, Mom, you're getting so forgetful." If I couldn't recall the name of an actress in an old movie, it was a sigh and a shared look between them. "Oh, Eleanor, your memory just isn't what it used to be, is it?" It was a slow, deliberate erosion, a dripping tap of psychological warfare designed to wear me down, to make me doubt my own mind, and most importantly, to provide them with the justification they needed for today. "I know this is hard," Richard finally mumbled, his voice strained, the words sounding rehearsed. "But after you fell last month, we just got so worried. We couldn't live with ourselves if something worse happened." The fall. The way he said it, you'd think I had tumbled down a flight of stairs. I had tripped over the edge of a hideous Persian rug that Vanessa had insisted on buying for the living room, a rug whose tassels were a clear and present danger to anyone over the age of 12.
I got a small purple bruise on my knee. That was the extent of the injury. But in their carefully edited version of reality, it had become a near-death experience, the undeniable proof of my rapidly declining state. I decided to test the waters to see how deep the deception truly ran. I let a note of manufactured confusion enter my voice. The money, Richard, the check for the children's college fund contribution? Did you remember to mail it? I left it on the hall table by the mail. It was a complete fabrication. I transferred the funds online myself on the first of each month, a task I would never entrust to them. Richard and Vanessa exchanged a look. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but I saw it in the rearview mirror. It was a look of confirmation, of shared victory. See? She's completely losing it. Don't you worry about that, Mom, Richard said, his tone now thick with a cloying, condescending pity. You just need to rest and let people look after you. No more stress about bills or finances. A cold, hard weight settled in my stomach. It wasn't just about getting rid of me. It was about total control. It was about seizing the keys to the kingdom. The silence that followed was my choice. It was the silence of a predator, not a victim. I was observing, listening, gathering the threads of their conspiracy. My son, the one whose fevers I had nursed, whose every small victory I had celebrated as if it were my own, was driving me to a cage. He thought he was closing a chapter. He had no idea he was declaring a war. The car turned into a long, manicured driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees that formed a majestic canopy. A discreet sign in elegant gold-leafed script read, "Golden Years Senior Living." My throat tightened, not from fear or sadness, but from a bitter, profound irony that was almost suffocating. Richard thought he was so clever. He'd found the most exclusive, most expensive facility in the state, a place renowned for its compassionate care and dignified approach. He would use my own money to pay for my gilded prison, all while telling the world what a wonderfully devoted son he was. What he didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was the secret I had guarded for over 2 decades. After my own mother had passed away in a grim state-run facility that smelled of bleach and quiet despair, I had made a vow on her grave. I had taken the small life insurance payout and my life savings and built a better place. I started with 1, then it became 2, then a network that spanned 3 states. I ran it all through an anonymous holding company, a firewall between my business life and my family. It was a decision I had made after my beloved husband David's funeral. I wanted to protect Richard from the pressures of wealth, from the sense of entitlement that had destroyed David's own father. I wanted him to make his own way, to find his own worth.
A loving, protective act that had now become the very weapon being used to orchestrate my undoing. As the car rolled to a silent stop under the elegant portico, I took a deep, steadying breath. My heart wasn't breaking, it was hardening, turning from flesh and blood into something more like granite. Richard came around to open my door, offering his arm with a flourish of false chivalry that made my stomach turn. "Here we are, Mom," he said, his voice a little too loud, a performance for any potential onlookers. "Your new home." The lobby of Golden Years was exactly as I had designed it to be, a gentle defiance of everything institutional. Warm, indirect light from a tasteful chandelier, a piece I had sourced from an artisan in Italy, fell on polished hardwood floors that gleamed with a soft luster. A faint, pleasant scent of lavender and chamomile hung in the air, a carefully calibrated fragrance piped through the ventilation system, a deliberate choice to counteract the antiseptic smell of most care homes. To my right, a magnificent Steinway grand piano stood silent, its polished ebony surface reflecting the light, waiting for the evening's resident recital. To my left, a cozy library with floor-to-ceiling cherrywood bookshelves was filled with residents reading in deep, comfortable armchairs. It was a place of peace, of dignity, of quiet intellectual life. It was my life's greatest work, a testament to my mother's memory. And today, It was my stage. A man in a sharp-tailored suit hurried toward us from behind a large reception desk, his face a carefully composed mask of professional sympathy. "Mr. Williams, I'm Robert Harrison, the facility director. A pleasure to welcome you to Golden Years." I recognized him instantly, of course. I had read his file a dozen times, had personally approved his promotion from a regional manager position 2 years ago based on his impressive efficiency and attention to detail. He was ambitious, meticulous, and knew me only as a name on a corporate letterhead, the anonymous, unseen chairperson of the board to whom he submitted his quarterly reports. To him, I was just another elderly woman being checked in by her family, another file to be processed. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," Vanessa said, taking charge with an air of practiced authority. "This is my mother-in-law, Eleanor. We've filled out most of the preliminary paperwork online to save time." "Excellent," Harrison said, turning his polished professional smile on me. It was a good smile, I noted with some detachment, conveying warmth without being overly familiar. He was good at his job. "Welcome, Eleanor. We're so very happy to have you join our community." I gave him a frail, slightly bewildered smile in return, a masterpiece of subtle acting. I allowed my hand to tremble a little as I reached for the walker Richard had insisted on buying me, a contraption I neither needed nor wanted. I played the part they had cast for me with an actor's commitment. Richard, meanwhile, was studiously avoiding my gaze, his eyes darting around the lobby, looking anywhere but at my face. He was staring intently at a large landscape painting on the far wall, a beautiful depiction of the Hudson River Valley that I had personally commissioned from a struggling local artist. The guilt was eating at him, a small, gnawing worm, but it wasn't strong enough to make him change course. As Harrison led us toward his spacious office, Richard spoke, his voice low and urgent, meant for my ears alone. "Now, Mom, Mr. Harrison has the rest of the admission forms. It's just a few signatures to finalize everything. It's mostly standard procedure for insurance and things." I knew precisely what standard procedure meant. Buried in that stack of papers, probably on page 3 or 4, would be a durable power of attorney document, the legal key to my entire life, my bank accounts, my properties, my very identity. In the office, which was tastefully appointed with leather chairs and framed architectural prints of the facility, Harrison laid out a thin folder on his large mahogany desk. Vanessa glided over and pulled a chair out for me with a flourish, her movements solicitous and completely, utterly fake. "Here you go, Eleanor. Just sit down and get comfortable. Let's get this boring part over with." I sat, keeping my back ramrod straight. Richard, following his protocol, pushed the folder toward me. "Just a few spots to sign and initial, ma'am. We can walk you through each one." Vanessa, ever the helpful one, picked up a heavy gold-plated pen from the desk holder and tried to press it into my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Here, dear, let me help you. Your hands must be tired." I looked at the pen, a ridiculously ostentatious thing. Then I looked at her perfectly manicured nails, the nails painted a blood red. I looked at my son, who was now studying the intricate pattern on the Persian rug as if his life depended on it. And then I did something they didn't expect. I smiled, a gentle, sweet, grandmotherly smile. "That's a lovely pen," I said softly, my voice a little shaky. "But my old eyes are so tired from the drive, and this all looks so very complicated." I gave a little helpless sigh and pushed the folder back toward the center of the desk with the tip of one finger. "I think I'd like to read it all carefully in my room first, when my head is clearer. You know how it is at my age. You sign the wrong thing, and the next thing you know, you've accidentally sold the house to a nice young man who comes to the door." My words were light, delivered with the airy tone of a slightly dotty old woman making a harmless joke. But they hit their mark like a well-aimed dart. A flash of pure, unadulterated anger crossed Vanessa's face before she could smooth it away. Richard shifted on his feet, clearing his throat loudly. "Of course, Mom. No rush at all. But it really is just standard stuff. Nothing to worry about.
I'm sure it is, dear, I said, still smiling that vacant, gentle smile. But I'll feel so much better once I've had a proper look with my reading glasses. You two go on. Don't let me keep you. I'll be perfectly fine. You've done so much. It was a dismissal, wrapped in the guise of senility. I was taking control, but in a way they couldn't possibly argue with. To protest, to insist I sign immediately, would be to reveal their ugly, grasping impatience. They were trapped by their own narrative. Vanessa's smile was now a thin, brittle line stretched across her face. All right, Eleanor, if you're sure, we'll come back tomorrow to see how you're settling in, and we can finish this. She gestured at the folder with a flick of her wrist, as if it were a piece of trash. Richard finally looked at me, a flicker of something. Was it shame, doubt, or just annoyance in his eyes? The staff will take good care of you, Mom. They're the best. I have no doubt, I said, my voice soft as silk. The delicious double meaning was entirely for my own enjoyment. The moment the heavy office door clicked shut, the frail, confused old woman vanished. I straightened my spine, my hands steady, my mind clear as a bell. I turned to Mr. Harrison, who was looking at me with a professionally neutral expression. My voice, when I spoke, was clear and steady. Mr. Harrison, I believe you were going to show me to my room. He seemed a bit taken aback by the sudden shift in my tone and demeanor, but quickly recovered. Of course, Mrs. Williams, right this way. The play had begun, and I knew exactly how every act was going to end. My room, or rather my suite, as it was designated, was Suite 204. It was spacious and filled with the warm glow of the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of the central rose garden, a feature I had fought for during the final design phase, a quiet tribute to my own mother, who had adored roses. The furniture was elegant but comfortable. The colors, soft creams, gentle blues, and warm woods, were calming. It was a place designed for tranquility, but for me, it was now a command center, a war room disguised as a haven. A young nurse with a kind, open face and a name tag that read Sarah helped me unpack the ridiculously small bag Richard had packed for me. It was a pathetic assortment of items, a curated collection of helplessness, a few threadbare nightgowns, a well-worn copy of a Harlequin romance novel I hadn't read in 30 years, and a single framed photo of Richard, Vanessa, and my two beautiful grandchildren, Lily and Sam. The sight of the children's smiling, innocent faces was a sharp physical pang, the only real moment of pain I allowed myself to feel. They were the blameless casualties in all of this. My fight wasn't just for me, it was for them. For the college fund I had so carefully built for them, a fund I knew Vanessa would drain without a second thought. After Sarah left, promising to return with a cup of hot tea, I walked to the door and engaged the deadbolt. The solid click was immensely satisfying. I moved to my handbag, which I had placed on the writing desk, from a hidden compartment in the lining, a feature I'd had a custom leather worker add years ago. I pulled out my secret weapon, a small, nondescript burner phone. It was an old habit from my early, more precarious business days, a tool for secure communication that I had never quite given up. I powered it on, the screen glowed to life, showing a single contact saved in its memory. A for Arthur. Arthur Bennett had been my lawyer for 40 years. More than that, he was the best friend of my late husband, David, and had stood by me like a rock through everything since David's sudden death and the chaotic aftermath of his funeral. He was sharp as a tack, fiercely loyal, and the only other person on the planet who knew the full, intricate extent of my assets and holdings. My fingers, steady and sure, typed a single character and hit send.
V. It was our prearranged signal, a ghost from a past where we had fought off hostile takeovers and corporate raiders. V for Valkyrie. It was the code name for a scorched earth contingency plan we had developed years ago, a plan designed to protect my empire from any and all threats, internal or external. I had never, in my wildest nightmares, dreamed the threat would come from my own son. Within 60 seconds, the phone buzzed silently with a reply. Acknowledged, standing by for instructions. I hope you were well, Eleanor. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. I wasn't alone. My most powerful piece, my queen, was now on the board and ready to move. My next call was more difficult, more fraught with emotion. I used the room's elegant landline, dialing a number I knew by heart. My housekeeper, Maria. She had been with me for over 20 years, had watched Richard grow from a moody teenager into a man, had helped me with the custody and care of my grandchildren whenever Richard and Vanessa needed a weekend away to recharge. She was more than an employee. She was family, the kind you choose. Maria, I said, keeping my voice low and urgent, it's Eleanor. Oh, Mrs. Williams! Oh my God! Are you all right? They just took you. I saw the bag. They said you were going on a little trip. I didn't know what to do. Her voice was a frantic whisper, thick with her lovely Spanish accent and genuine, unfeigned distress. I'm fine, Maria. I'm safe. But I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to be my eyes and ears. I need to know what's happening in my house. Anything, Mrs. Williams. You know that. Anything for you. Have you heard anything? Anything at all? About the house, about their plans? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped even lower to a conspiratorial whisper. It's Mrs. Vanessa. She is a snake, Mrs. Williams. All the time on the phone, whispering. Yesterday, I was dusting in the hall, and I heard her in the study. She was talking to some man, a real estate man. She was talking about selling the house? She said they needed to liquidate the primary asset as soon as the legalities were settled. And then she laughed, Mrs. Williams. She said the old woman will never even know what hit her. The words were a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about getting control of my finances. It was about erasing me completely. Selling my home, the place where I had raised my son, the place filled with every memory I had of my husband. They wanted to tear it all down, sell it for parts, and dance on the rebel. Thank you, Maria, I said, my voice tight with a fury I had to control. You have been very brave. Do not let them know you've spoken to me. Stay safe. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the plush bed, the fury a cold, white-hot fire in my veins. This was no longer just about a financial betrayal, it was about desecration. I needed to understand how deep the rot went. I made one more call, this time to my cousin, Carol. I had always been good to Carol. I had helped her with a down payment on her first car when she was a struggling single mother, had paid for her daughter's braces, and had slipped her a check every Christmas. I told her a carefully edited, watered-down version of the story, painting myself as a confused and heartbroken mother who had been railroaded by her son. Her reaction was my next shock, another layer of betrayal I hadn't anticipated. Oh, Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with a false, sticky pity. I know it's hard to accept, but maybe Richard is right. You haven't been yourself lately. He's a good boy. He has a lot on his plate. He and Vanessa are just trying to do what's best for you. It's a wonderful place, I hear. A good boy? The words echoed in my head, hollow and false. And then I knew. She was in on it. Maybe not the whole sordid plan, but she had been co-opted, her loyalty bought with a few kind words, and, I suspect, the promise of future favors or a small cut of the spoils.
The betrayal was a web, a sticky, intricate trap, and I was only just beginning to see how far its strands reached.
I ended the call politely, my mind racing, my heart turning to ice. My own flesh and blood. It hardened my resolve into something unbreakable. There would be no mercy. Not anymore. A soft knock came at the door. It was Sarah with my tea. Her simple, genuine kindness was a stark, painful contrast to the nest of vipers I had just uncovered. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Williams?" she asked, her young face etched with concern. "You look upset." I summoned a weak smile from the depths of my resolve. "I'm just a little tired from the day, dear. Thank you." As I sipped the hot, fragrant tea, a new, clearer plan began to form in my mind. They thought they had the upper hand. They had a doctor lined up, ready to declare me incompetent. They thought they were playing chess with a captured pawn. They were about to find out they were facing a queen. And she was about to make her first devastating move. The next morning, Richard and Vanessa arrived as promised, punctual as executioners. They came armed with fresh smiles that didn't reach their eyes and a new, more aggressive determination. The failure to get my signature on the power of attorney yesterday had clearly frustrated them. Today, they were moving on to phase 2 of their operation, brute force by way of medical authority. "Good morning, Mom," Richard said, planting a kiss on my forehead that felt as cold and damp as a stone from a riverbed. "Did you sleep well? The beds here are supposed to be excellent." "Like a baby," I lied, giving him a serene, placid smile. I had, in fact, been up half the night on a secure conference call with Arthur and 2 of his top litigators, gaming out every possible scenario, planning my countermoves with the precision of a military campaign. Vanessa, ever the director of this sordid play, got straight to the point, dispensing with the pleasantries. "Eleanor, we were so terribly worried about you yesterday, especially after you mentioned feeling so confused about the paperwork. So, we took the liberty of scheduling a little wellness checkup for you this morning with a wonderful doctor, just to make sure everything is okay, to give us all peace of mind." "A doctor?" I asked, injecting a note of weary surprise into my voice. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. I feel perfectly fine today." "It's no trouble at all," Richard insisted, his voice taking on a firm, parental tone that set my teeth on edge. "It's already arranged. Dr. Fields is one of the best geriatric specialists in the state. People wait months to see him. It's for your own good, Mom. We need a professional baseline." Dr. Fields. The name was completely unfamiliar, which meant he was their man. A hired gun brought in to provide the medical justification they needed to petition a court for conservatorship. This was their checkmate move, the final piece of their puzzle. They just didn't know that I had already swapped out their king for one of my own. "Well, all right," I said, with a heavy, put-upon sigh of resignation. "I don't want to be a bother." Their relief was palpable. They escorted me down to the medical wing of Golden Years, a facility I had personally designed and funded, ensuring it had better diagnostic equipment than many private hospitals. Vanessa was practically giddy with anticipation, her steps light and bouncy. She believed her plan was finally coming to fruition. Richard just looked pale and sweaty, a man being dragged along by a current too strong for him to fight. They were led to a comfortable, sunlit waiting area with plush chairs and a selection of current magazines, while I was shown into a spacious examination room. A few minutes later, the door opened, but it wasn't an unfamiliar Dr. Fields who walked in. It was a handsome, authoritative woman in her late 40s with intelligent, compassionate eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor. Her embroidered name tag on her crisp white coat read, "Dr. Isabella Ramirez, Chief of Medicine." She was my doctor, my appointee. I had personally recruited her from Johns Hopkins 3 years ago, drawn by her impeccable credentials and her fierce advocacy for patient dignity. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, her voice perfectly professional but with an undercurrent of warmth that only I could detect. She gave no outward sign of our true relationship.
I'm Dr. Ramirez. I'll be conducting your assessment today. I understand your family has expressed some concerns about your memory. So they tell me, I said dryly, allowing a small, wry smile to touch my lips. The assessment began. It was not a cursory checkup. It was a comprehensive neurological and cognitive examination that lasted for over an hour. It was thorough, covering everything from physical reflexes and motor skills to complex cognitive tests. There were memory games, logic puzzles, abstract reasoning questions, and detailed inquiries about current events. I answered everything calmly, precisely, and without hesitation. When she asked me to list the last 5 Treasury secretaries in reverse order, I did. When she asked me to draw a perfect clock face showing the time as 10 past 11, my hand was steady as a rock. When she gave me a list of 15 unrelated words and asked me to recall them 10 minutes later, I recited all 15 in the correct order. Then, after the formal testing was complete, she leaned forward, her expression shifting from clinical to personal. Eleanor, off the record, how have you been feeling? Any unusual stress? Your chart shows your blood pressure is a bit high. This is the opening Arthur and I had planned. This was my opportunity to get my side of the story into a legally binding medical document. I didn't just play the victim. I presented the facts of my case with the clarity of a CEO delivering a quarterly report. I told her about the constant gaslighting, the manufactured instances of my forgetfulness, the relentless pressure to sign legal documents I hadn't read, the feeling of being deliberately isolated from my friends and my normal routines. I didn't use emotional language. I used the language of a witness giving a sworn statement. I claim they're forgetting things, I concluded, my voice steady. But it seems to me they are the ones who have forgotten who I am. What I am capable of. Dr. Ramirez listened intently, her pen flying across her notepad. When she was finished, she gave me a reassuring smile. Well, Eleanor, based on my examination, your cognitive functions are not just normal for a woman of 70, they are in the top percentile. Your memory is sharper than most of my residents and, frankly, sharper than many of my third-year medical students. She paused, her gaze direct and meaningful. However, your physical exam shows clear signs of someone under significant, prolonged stress. Your cortisol levels are elevated. This is consistent with a person living in a hostile or coercive emotional environment. She had given me exactly what I needed, not just a clean bill of mental health, but a medical record of their psychological abuse. She printed out 2 copies of the official summary report. She signed both with a flourish and handed one to me. This is for your personal records. I was escorted back to the waiting area, holding the report in my hand like a shield. Richard and Vanessa were sipping coffee, looking confident and smug. So, how did it go in there? Vanessa asked, her voice bright and brittle with anticipation. Before I could answer, Dr. Ramirez entered the room with a face of perfect professional neutrality. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, I've completed my comprehensive assessment of your mother.
And? Richard asked, leaning forward so eagerly he almost spilled his coffee. Physically, she is in excellent health for her age, Dr. Ramirez stated, her voice clear and carrying. And mentally, she is exceptionally sharp. There are absolutely no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any cognitive decline that would in any way impair her ability to manage her own personal or financial affairs. The smiles vanished from their faces as if wiped away by an invisible hand. Vanessa's coffee cup rattled in its saucer, a loud, jarring sound in the suddenly silent room. "What?" Vanessa stammered, her face a comical picture of disbelief. But that's not possible. She's been so confused. She forgets everything." Dr. Ramirez's gaze was as cool and sharp as ice. "My examination, which is now a legally documented medical record, finds no evidence whatsoever to support that claim. In fact, the only medical issue of note is a significant level of stress, which can sometimes be caused by external pressures." She let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Mrs. Williams is perfectly, legally, and medically competent. Have a good day." She turned on her heel and left them sitting there, their mouths agape, their perfect plan in ruins. Their checkmate had been countered and their queen taken. I stood up, holding my copy of the report. "Well, that's a tremendous relief, isn't it?" I said, my voice dripping with false innocence. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll go enjoy the sunshine in the rose garden. It's such a lovely day." I walked away, not looking back, leaving them in a stunned, furious silence. They had lost the battle, but I knew, with chilling certainty, that the war was far from over. Their next move would be driven by pure desperation, and that would make them even more dangerous. The victory with Dr. Ramirez was sweet, a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. A desperate animal, when cornered, doesn't reason. It lashes out. I had blocked their attempt to have me declared medically incompetent, which meant they would now be forced to accelerate their plans to seize my assets through more direct and likely illegal means. The conversation Maria had overheard was no longer a contingency plan. It was now their only path forward. They would try to forge documents, to lie, to bully, to steal. I had to move faster, and I had to be more ruthless. Back in the quiet, sunlit sanctuary of Suite 204, I didn't waste a single moment. The adrenaline from the confrontation was singing in my veins. I locked the door, the sound of the deadbolt a satisfying thud of finality. I pulled out the burner phone again. This time, I didn't text Arthur. I made a call, using a secure, encrypted application that was impossible to trace. "Arthur," I said, the moment he picked up. My voice was low and steady. "They have the medical report. They're cornered. They will become reckless now." He said, "I saw it." His voice was grim, but I could hear the undercurrent of satisfaction. Dr. Ramirez forwarded a secure notarized copy to my office the moment she signed it. Her notes on their coercive behavior are damning. It's a beautiful piece of legal ammunition. "What are your orders, Eleanor?" Orders. It was a word I hadn't used in a personal context for a very long time. For years, I had been mom and grandma, but this was business, the most brutally personal business of my life. "The time for observation is over, Arthur," I said, my voice as hard as forged steel. "I want to move from defense to offense. I want a full financial workup on Richard and Vanessa Williams. I want to know every credit card they hold, every loan they've taken, every secret account they might have. I want to know the name and history of this Dr. Fields they tried to hire. I want to know the name of every person in my life, like my cousin Carol, who has been compromised. I want a complete, detailed map of their entire conspiracy." "Consider it done," Arthur said, without a moment's hesitation. "I've already had a preliminary team on it since you sent the V signal. They're good, very good. Ex-FBI mostly. They know how to dig. They'll find everything, Eleanor. There won't be a single stone left unturned." "How long?" I asked, pacing the length of the room. "These things take time to do properly, but given the urgency, give me until morning. I'll have a preliminary dossier for you by 8 a.m. You have it. And Arthur, be prepared to activate Valkyrie on my command. The full protocol. The board is ready and waiting, Eleanor. We just need your word." I hung up, a cold, clear sense of purpose settling over me. For years, I had deliberately played the part of the doting, slightly naive mother and grandmother. I had set aside the ruthless, calculating businesswoman who had built an empire from scratch. I had done it out of love, a misguided attempt to give my son a normal life, free from the shadow of my success. Now, to save myself and the legacy I had built for his innocent children, I had to resurrect that woman, and she was showing no mercy.
For the rest of the day, I maintained my cover with the dedication of a seasoned spy. I had a pleasant lunch in the communal dining room, exchanging small talk and pleasantries with other residents. I had a long conversation with a lovely woman named Mrs. Henderson, a retired history teacher whose mind was as sharp as a tack. She told me stories about her own children, how they visited every weekend, how her son helped her with her finances. Each word was a painful reminder of what I had lost, or perhaps what I had never truly had in the first place. I took a long, slow walk in the rose garden, the place I had designed as a living tribute to my mother. She had loved roses with a passion. Each perfect bloom, the deep crimson of the Mr. Lincolns, the delicate blush of the Queen Elizabeths, was a memory, a symbol of the fierce, unconditional love that had fueled my ambition. As I looked at them, I wasn't just thinking of her, I was thinking of my own legacy. It wasn't the money or the buildings or the stock portfolio. It was the principle behind it all, creating a place of beauty, safety, and dignity for those in their twilight years. Richard and Vanessa weren't just trying to steal my money, they were trying to spit on my mother's grave, and that I would not allow. That evening, as I was finishing a light supper of poached salmon and asparagus in my room, there was a knock on the door. It was Mr. Harrison, the director. He looked flustered, holding a tablet computer as if it were a hot potato. "Mrs. Williams, I do apologize for disturbing your dinner." "Not at all, Robert," I said, deliberately using his first name to establish a new dynamic between us. "Please come in." He stepped inside, his eyes darting around the room nervously. I have a message for you, a rather unusual one. It came through our corporate secure server. It's flagged as highest priority, eyes only, and it's addressed to the chairman of the board." He swallowed hard. The system says the chairman is currently in residence, here, in this suite. I'm afraid there must be some sort of glitch, a serious security flaw in our system." I smiled faintly, setting my napkin on the tray. The time for games with him was over. I needed my general on the field, fully briefed and fully committed. "There is no glitch, Robert," I said calmly. I gestured to the comfortable armchair in the corner of the room. "Please have a seat. I think it's time you and I had a proper, transparent conversation."
He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind, but they formed a picture so improbable, so utterly outside the realm of his experience, that he could barely comprehend it. The quiet, elderly woman who had been callously abandoned by her son, the mysterious, never-seen, almost mythical chairperson of the board. "You," he whispered, the single word a breath of pure astonishment. "Me," I confirmed, my voice dropping the last pretense of frailty. It was the voice I used in the boardroom, the voice that had silenced arguments and sealed $100 million deals. "Now, sit down, Robert. We have a great deal of work to do. And the first thing I need from you is your absolute unwavering discretion and your undivided loyalty." The shock on his face slowly morphed into dawning comprehension, then into a profound awe, and finally into a steely, focused resolve. He sat down, no longer a facility director speaking to a new, vulnerable resident, but a subordinate reporting to his commander-in-chief. "Yes, Madam Chairperson," he said, his voice firm and clear. "What are your orders?" The secret was out to my first key ally on the inside. The pieces were moving into place. The storm was about to break over the heads of my unsuspecting children. The next morning, precisely at 8 a.m., the dossier from Arthur's team arrived as a heavily encrypted file on my burner phone. Sitting in the warm morning sun of my suite, which streamed through the large windows and made patterns on the carpet, I opened the file. With a cup of strong black tea I'd had delivered, I began to read. Mr. Harrison sat opposite me in a plush armchair, silent and grim-faced, having transformed overnight from a facility director into my temporary chief of staff and confidant.
The information contained in the dossier was more sordid and pathetic than I had imagined. It painted a detailed picture of a life lived on the brink of financial ruin, propped up by deceit and my money. Richard wasn't just bad at business, he was a walking catastrophe, drowning in a sea of debt he had hidden from everyone. He had taken out a second mortgage on his house, the beautiful home I had given them the down payment for as a wedding gift. He had maxed out over a dozen credit cards, each with a staggering interest rate. My son, living a life of quiet, frantic desperation, putting on a grand show of success for his friends, while his financial world crumbled around him. His salary from his last disastrous venture, a tech startup that never even launched, had been gone for months. This wasn't just about simple greed, it was about a desperate, panicked attempt to stay afloat. He saw me not as his mother, but as a life raft he was willing to sink in order to save himself. Vanessa, the report confirmed, was the engine of the operation. She was the one pushing him, whispering in his ear. The report detailed her spending habits with cold, hard numbers, meant thousands a month on clothes from high-end boutiques, spa treatments, lavish lunches with friends, where she undoubtedly complained about her difficult mother-in-law. It also included damning transcripts of her calls with the real estate agent, a slick operator named Mark. They weren't just planning to sell my house, they had already accepted a provisional, significantly below market offer from a developer friend of Mark's. The deal was contingent on them securing power of attorney within 30 days. They were going to sell it fast and cheap, take the cash, and run. The report also confirmed my deepest suspicions about my cousin Carol. A wire transfer of $5,000 had been made from a secondary account of Vanessa's to Carol's bank account 2 weeks ago. The memo line simply read, "For your help and discretion." She had sold her loyalty, her family tied to me for the price of a used car. The pettiness of the betrayal was almost as painful as the act itself. Every line of the report was another twist of the knife in my heart. But with the pain came a chilling, empowering clarity. I saw the entire web, every grubby strand, every sordid connection. I knew their motives, their weaknesses, their desperate timeline. "They're amateurs," I said aloud, my voice devoid of all emotion. Harrison looked at me, a question in his eyes. "They're driven by greed and panic," I explained. "That makes them predictable. That makes them sloppy." "What is our next move, Madam Chairperson?" Harrison asked, his voice low and steady. "We don't just block them," I said, a cold, hard plan forming in my mind. "That's not enough. We let them walk further into the trap. We let them think they are succeeding. Then we spring it." I made the call to Arthur. My voice was calm, my instructions precise. "Arthur, it's time to begin the Valkyrie Protocol. Phase 1. Ready, Eleanor. I want you to prepare the papers, not to freeze Richard's accounts. Not yet. That's too blunt. I want you to prepare a formal offer from one of our subsidiary corporations, a shell company he won't recognize, to buy out his business debts. All of them. Every single one. For pennies on the dollar from the lenders who are about to write them off anyway." There was a thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "You want to bail him out?" Arthur asked, a rare note of confusion in his voice. "No," I said, my voice like ice. "I want to own him. I want to become his sole creditor. When the time comes, I want the power to ruin him to be entirely and exclusively in my hands, not spread among a dozen faceless banks." I could almost hear the slow, appreciative smile forming on Arthur's face. "That's diabolical, Eleanor. I love it. It will take a day, perhaps 2, to arrange the transfers discreetly." "Do it," I commanded. "As for the house, I want you to contact the developer who made the offer to Vanessa's agent. I want you to make a counter-offer to buy the entire parcel of land he's developing, a deal so lucrative he would be a fool to refuse it. The deal will be contingent on him severing all ties with the agent, Mark, immediately and permanently." "And Vanessa?" Arthur asked. "Let her keep trying to sell a house that is no longer on the market," I said coldly. "Let her spin her wheels in the mud. I want her to feel the frustration build." The strategy was set. It wasn't a frontal assault, it was a silent, invisible siege. I would cut off their allies, buy out their debts, and neutralize their primary asset, all while they still thought they were in control, still thought I was a helpless old woman locked in a room. That afternoon, as if on cue, Richard and Vanessa returned. They had clearly recovered from the shock of the doctor's visit and had adopted a new strategy: love bombing. They brought me a ridiculously large bouquet of expensive lilies, a flower I've always disliked, as they well knew, because it reminded me of funerals, and a box of gourmet chocolates. "We're so sorry about yesterday, Mum. We were just so worried about you. We completely overreacted." "We love you, Eleanor," Vanessa added, squeezing my arm with her cold fingers. "We just want you to be happy and safe. That's all we've ever wanted." I played my part with Oscar-worthy skill, accepting their gifts and their fake apologies with a watery, grateful smile. I let them believe they were smoothing things over, that the doddering old mother was easily placated with cheap sentiment and chocolate. We sat and made small talk for an hour. They talked about their friends, about a vacation they were planning to Hawaii. They were building a fantasy world right in front of me, and I let them.
As they were leaving, feeling confident and successful, Richard paused at the door. "By the way, Mom, some potential business associates of mine might be calling you in the next few days. Just for a character reference, it would really help me secure a new line of funding for my next project." My blood ran cold. The audacity! He was going to use me, my good name, my reputation in the community, to borrow more money, to dig a deeper hole for me to fill. I smiled sweetly, the picture of a proud, helpful mother. "Of course, dear, anything to help my son." He left satisfied. He had no idea that by morning, the business associates he was counting on would no longer take his calls. He had no idea that I was now the one holding all his markers. The storm was no longer coming, it was here, and they were standing right in the middle of it, completely, blissfully oblivious. 2 days. That's how long I gave them. 48 hours. I let them live in their fool's paradise, let them make their calls and spin their webs of deceit, all while my team worked silently and invisibly in the background. Arthur confirmed that the operations were complete. We now held every penny of Richard's consolidated debt. The developer, as predicted, had eagerly accepted our lucrative offer, cutting Vanessa's smarmy agent out of the deal completely and rendering my house unsellable by them. The trap was fully set, the steel jaws oiled and waiting. The trigger was a frantic, high-pitched phone call Richard made to me on the third morning. He sounded breathless, as if he had been running. "Mom, something is wrong. Something is terribly wrong," he practically shouted into the phone. "My credit cards are being declined, all of them. The bank won't tell me anything. They just keep saying my accounts are under review. And the funding for my new deal, it just evaporated overnight. My partners won't even return my calls. It's like I've become a ghost. Do you know anything about this?" His voice was a chaotic mix of raw fear and rising accusation. The predator was beginning to realize the walls of the cage were not just visible, but closing in fast. "Why, no, Richard," I said, my voice a perfect symphony of calm, motherly concern. "That sounds terribly stressful. I don't understand any of that business talk. Perhaps you should come here to Golden Years, and we can talk about it calmly." "We're on our way," he snapped, the fear making him rude, and he hung up without another word. I immediately placed a call to Mr. Harrison's direct line. "They're coming, Robert. They are agitated. I want you to meet them in the lobby. Escort them to the main conference room on the executive floor. Not your office, the big one, the one overlooking the city." "And you, Madam Chairperson?" His voice was steady, professional. "I'll be waiting for them," I said,
And please have Mr. Bennett meet me there in 5 minutes. It's time for the board meeting. The executive conference room was on the top floor of the main building, a sanctum that residents never saw. It was my space, designed for one purpose: to project power. A long, gleaming mahogany table, so polished you could see your reflection in it, stretched the length of the room, reflecting the panoramic view of the city skyline from the floor-to-ceiling windows. At the head of the table was a single, high-backed leather chair. My chair. When I entered, Arthur was already there, impeccably dressed in a dark charcoal suit, a thin leather portfolio placed precisely in front of him. Standing discreetly against the far wall, flanking the door, were two large, serious-looking men in conservative suits, my security detail. They were unobtrusive, but their presence was an undeniable statement. I took my seat at the head of the table. I didn't feel nervous. I felt a sense of grim, heavy finality. This was the culmination of a lifetime of love and a month of betrayal. A few minutes later, the double doors opened silently. Harrison led a frantic-looking Richard and a furious-looking Vanessa into the room. They stopped dead just inside the doorway, their angry momentum halted by the sheer unexpectedness of the scene. They were expecting to find me in my little suite, a confused old woman they could bully and interrogate. They were not expecting this. The austere formality, the breathtaking view, the silent, imposing men by the door. Their eyes darted around the room, wide with confusion, finally landing on me, sitting at the head of the long table like a queen on her throne. What is this?" Vanessa stammered, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking and falling away. "You're in my office," I said simply, my voice calm and even. Richard stared at me, his face pale with a confusion so profound it looked like a physical ailment. "Your office? Mom, what are you talking about? What in God's name is going on? And who are these men?" He gestured wildly at my security team. "This is my lawyer, Arthur Bennett, whom I believe you've met," I said, gesturing gracefully to Arthur. "And these two gentlemen are my security staff. Please, have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss." They hesitated, looking at each other, a silent, panicked communication passing between them. Then, as if their legs could no longer support them, they sank into the plush leather chairs opposite me, looking small and lost at the enormous, intimidating table. Richard found his voice first, a surge of righteous anger cutting through his confusion. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "My money, Mom! What did you do? I know you're behind this. You've ruined me." "Your money?" I let the question hang in the air, cold and sharp. That's an interesting concept, an interesting choice of words. Let's talk about it. Arthur, if you would be so kind as to begin the presentation. Arthur, without a word, opened his portfolio. His voice, when he spoke, was cool, precise, and utterly devastating. He started with Richard's debts, listing each one, the staggering totals, the cripplingly high interest rates. He painted a verbal picture of Richard's financial house of cards. Then he delivered the first crushing blow. As of 9 a.m. yesterday, a private holding company, which, for the record, also owns this facility, acquired 100% of your outstanding personal and business debt, Richard. This means you no longer owe money to a dozen different banks and lenders. You owe it all, every single penny, to a single creditor. You owe it all to your mother. Richard looked as if he had been physically struck, a gasp of air escaping his lungs. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Vanessa, however, recovered faster, her nature more venomous. "This is ridiculous. This is illegal. You can't do that. We'll sue you. You're a senile old woman playing sick games." "Am I?" I asked softly, raising an eyebrow. I gave another slight nod to Arthur. He then smoothly transitioned to the next part of his presentation. He laid out the evidence of Vanessa's conspiracy with the precision of a prosecutor. He detailed the phone transcripts with the real estate agent. He produced bank records of the $5,000 payment to my cousin Carol. He displayed a copy of the provisional under-market sales agreement for my house that she had signed. Every lie, every secret, every sordid maneuver was laid bare on the polished table between us. Vanessa's face went from a blotchy red to a ghastly white. That's illegal, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You spied on us. You tapped our phones.
No, Vanessa, Arthur corrected her smoothly, his voice still maddeningly calm. I conducted a perfectly legal and thorough investigation into the fraudulent activities being perpetrated against my client. It's called due diligence. I'm sure your own lawyer can explain it to you. The absolute finality of it all settled over them. They were utterly, completely, and irrevocably exposed. Richard slumped in his chair, his head falling into his hands, and he began to mutter, "Oh God, oh God, oh God," over and over again. Vanessa, however, was made of harder, more brittle stuff. Her fear turned to pure, venomous rage. She rose from her chair so quickly it almost tipped over. Her hands slammed down on the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. She pointed a trembling, accusing finger at me. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly thing. "You did this! You've always hated me. You were always trying to control him, to control our lives with your damned money. You think you've won, you old witch!" I met her hateful gaze without flinching. My own anger was a cold, controlled flame, not a wildfire like hers. "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This meeting is over. You may see yourselves out." I paused, then delivered the final crushing line. "Or, my security staff will be more than happy to escort you from my property." The fight was over. I had won. But as I watched my only son, broken and sobbing at my boardroom table, I felt no joy. Only the vast, empty, aching space of a victory that had cost me everything I had once held dear. For a long, silent moment, the only sound in the vast conference room was the sound of Richard's ragged, broken breathing. He was shattered, a marionette whose strings had been cut. But Vanessa was not. A cornered rat doesn't surrender. It bites. Her face, which had been pale with the shock of exposure, began to flush with the dark, mottled red. The last vestiges of the sophisticated, charming daughter-in-law evaporated, replaced by something raw, primal, and ugly. "You think you've won," she sneered, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. She snatched her phone from the table, her fingers flying across the screen with a frantic energy. "You think you can just sit here in your glass tower and ruin us with your army of lawyers? The whole world is about to find out what kind of mother you really are. A cold, cruel, manipulative tyrant who threw her own son out on the street for a minor disagreement. I have friends in the press, real sharks, people who live for stories like this. By tomorrow, the name Golden Years won't sound so dignified. It'll be synonymous with elder abuse, corporate greed, and twisted family betrayal. Your precious legacy, your tribute to your sainted mother, will be a pile of stinking ash." She held up the phone like a weapon, a triumphant, crazed look of madness in her eye. "I'm sending the text right now. This will be a bigger story than any celebrity divorce or political scandal. This will be a legend of the horrible rich. You'll be a monster, and we," she gestured wildly at herself and the sobbing form of my son, "we will be the victims." It was her last-ditch effort, a desperate, scorched-earth attempt to turn her personal defeat into my public crucifixion.
She believed it was her trump card, the one move I couldn't possibly have anticipated. She thought I could drag her down into the mud with her, that my fear of public shame would be greater than my resolve. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move. I simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Arthur, who had been watching this display with an expression of profound, weary distaste. My lawyer, my old friend, allowed himself a small, grim smile. He turned his laptop around on the table to face Vanessa. With the deliberate click of the trackpad, the screen came to life, showing a video call that was already in progress, waiting silently in the background. On the screen was the face of a man in his late 50s, with shrewd, intelligent eyes and the weary but powerful demeanor of someone who has seen it all. His name appeared in a small, neat font at the bottom of the screen. David Chen, editor-in-chief of the New York Chronicle, the most respected and feared newspaper in the country. "Vanessa," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade like a surgeon's scalpel, clean and precise. "I'd like you to meet David Chen. David is a very old and dear friend. His father and my late husband David were business partners for 30 years. We were just discussing my plans for a new charitable foundation I'm endowing." David Chen, on the screen, gave a slight professional nod. His image was crystal clear. "Eleanor, Arthur, I hope this isn't a bad time?" "Not at all, David," I said smoothly, my eyes never leaving Vanessa's horrified, disbelieving face. "In fact, something has just come up that might interest you. It seems I have an exclusive story for your front page, should you want it. It's a compelling human interest piece. It's a story about a mother, the quiet empire she built to honor her own mother's memory, and a painful family betrayal that nearly tore it all apart." I leaned forward, my voice dropping slightly, letting my words sink in like poison. "I find, after today, that I'm finally ready to tell my story. In my own words, with full access to all corroborating documents." The color drained from Vanessa's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. The phone, her last weapon, slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the mahogany table. The sound was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent room. Her weapon had not only been neutralized, it had been turned against her with terrifying surgical precision. She had threatened me with a firecracker, and I had responded by revealing my control of the entire arsenal. She stared at the screen, at the powerful, impassioned face of David Chen, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. No sound came out. The fight, the venom, the rage had all gone out of her completely, replaced by the blank, hollow, terrified look of total and utter defeat. She had flown too close to the sun, and her wax wings had melted. I turned my attention to my son. He had finally lifted his head from his hands and had watched the entire exchange with wide, uncomprehending eyes. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his doting, slightly dotty mother, but as the formidable, strategic power I had hidden from him his entire life. The realization seemed to be dawning on him, and it was a terrifying dawn. "Get out," I said, and my voice was not cruel, just tired, an ocean of weariness in those two words. "Both of you. Get out of my building." The two security men, who had been standing as still as statues, took one single synchronized forward. They didn't touch them, but their presence, their sheer size and seriousness, was an undeniable command. Vanessa, moving like a sleepwalker, a ghost in a designer suit, turned and stumbled towards the door. Richard, after a long, agonizing moment where his eyes, filled with a universe of confusion and regret, met mine, pushed himself up from the chair and followed her. His shoulders were slumped, His new cobalt tie was askew, and he looked like a man who had just lost everything. Because he had. The heavy doors closed behind them with a soft, final click, leaving Arthur, the security team, and me in the silent, sunlit room.
I looked out the vast window at the city I had helped to build, at the spires of glass and steel that reached for the sky. I will be, Arthur, I said softly. I will be. The war was won. Now came the long, difficult task of surveying the wreckage and deciding what, if anything, was worth salvaging. The aftermath was swift and brutal, a controlled demolition of the life Richard and Vanessa had built on a foundation of my money and their lies. Arthur Bennett, acting on my precise instructions, executed the plan with the cold, dispassionate precision of a surgeon removing a cancer. There was no anger in my decisions, no thirst for revenge. There was only a grim, quiet sense of consequence. They had sown the wind, and now they would reap the whirlwind. The first thing to go was the house. Since my holding company now owned Richard's consolidated debt, I was effectively his sole mortgage holder. The official foreclosure notice was delivered by a courier the very next day. They were given 30 days to vacate the premises. The same beautiful home where they had plotted my demise, where they had laughed at the thought of me being locked away, was being stripped from them. Their shared panic and the blame they cast upon each other quickly curdled into a toxic, corrosive resentment. Maria, my loyal housekeeper, who I had given a generous severance package and a standing offer of employment in any of my other properties, told me what happened in those final, ugly weeks. She described screaming matches that echoed through the half-empty house at all hours of the day and night. Vanessa, her voice a shrill weapon, accused Richard of being a weak, incompetent failure who had hitched his wagon to her star only to drag them both into the gutter. Richard, finally stripped of his delusions and Vanessa's influence, retaliated by accusing her of being a poisonous, greedy manipulator who had systematically turned him against his own mother. The expensive furniture, the designer clothes, the luxury cars, all of it became ammunition in their bitter civil war. They sold what they could for pennies on the dollar, not to pay their debts, but to fund their own individual lawyers. Their impending divorce was set to be as vicious and destructive as their marriage had been fraudulent. Vanessa left first. One morning, about 2 weeks into the 30-day notice, she was simply gone. She had packed what she could fit into her luxury sedan, the clothes, the jewelry, the handbags, and disappeared, leaving behind a mountain of shared debt and a curt, hateful note for Richard on the kitchen counter. The last I heard, through a discreet inquiry made by Arthur's team, she was living with her sister in a suburban tract house in Arizona, the queen of her social circle reduced to a long-term, unwelcome guest in a spare bedroom. Richard was left alone in the echoing, half-empty house to face the full, crushing weight of his actions. He had no money, no wife, no career prospects, and soon no home. The so-called friends he'd had were merely business associates and fair-weather companions who vanished the moment the money and status dried up. He had systematically alienated the one person in the world who had ever truly, unconditionally supported him. He had hit rock bottom, a deep, dark place of his own making. I didn't take a shred of pleasure in his downfall. Watching from a distance, through the dry, factual reports from Arthur, I felt a profound, aching sorrow. This was the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose convoluted stories I had patiently listened to, whose every mediocre school play I had applauded as if it were a Broadway triumph. How had that boy become this broken, desperate stranger? I made sure, through Arthur, that he didn't end up on the street. That was a line I would not cross. A small, basic, furnished apartment was rented in his name for a period of 6 months, paid for from a blind trust I controlled. It was a roof over his head, but nothing more.
It was a world away from the lavish lifestyle he was used to, but it was a chance to breathe. What he did with it was entirely up to him. I stayed at Golden Years for another month, not as a resident, but as the hands-on owner. I worked side by side with Harrison, streamlining operations, improving services, and getting to know the staff and residents on a personal level. I ate my meals in the communal dining room, listening to their stories, their joys, their grievances. I found a renewed sense of purpose in the community I had built, a purpose that had been clouded by my family troubles. I was healing, one day at a time. One of the last things I did before I finally moved out to a new place of my own was to make a call to my cousin, Carol. She answered the phone hesitantly, her voice small and filled with a well-deserved dread. "Hello, Carol," I said, my voice calm and even. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I never should have—" "No, you're not," I said, my voice flat, cutting through her pathetic attempt at an apology. "You're sorry you got caught. There's a certified check in the mail for you for $5,000. There was a beat of stunned silence, then, You're giving it back to me?" she asked, a pathetic flicker of hope in her voice. "No, I'm buying your silence, and I'm buying you out of my life. That check is your severance pay from this family. You will cash it, and then you will delete my number. You will never contact me or my family. Are we clear?" "Yes, Eleanor." I hung up before she could say another word. I was cutting out the rot, one cancerous piece at a time. It was a painful, necessary surgery. My old life was over, burned down to the foundations. From the ashes, I had to decide what kind of life, what kind of woman I was going to build next. 18 months. That's how long it took for the dust to truly settle, for the echoes of the explosion to finally fade. It was a year and a half of quiet, deliberate rebuilding, not of my empire, which had never been in jeopardy, but of myself. I didn't return to my old house on the hill. The memories there were tainted, the very walls saturated with deceit. Instead, I bought a small, elegant home perched on a cliff by the sea, a place of constant wind and crashing waves and endless, open horizons. The air was clean, the light was bright, and it was entirely and unequivocally my own. My life became simple but full. My dear friend Maggie, my rock, came to stay with me often. We'd walk for miles on the hard-packed sand at low tide, our conversation easy and comfortable, a soothing balm to the soul. I still ran my company, but I did it from a sun-drenched office that overlooked the churning blue-gray of the Atlantic. I had finally learned the art of delegation, to trust the excellent team I had built, including Robert Harrison, who, after a year of proving his mettle, was now the chief operating officer of the entire Golden Years network. I had also, after much soul-searching, laid down the terms for Richard. There would be no easy forgiveness, no simple, rug-sweeping return to the way things were. True healing, I had come to understand, required more than just apologies. It required tangible, demonstrable change. Through Arthur, I gave him a path, a lifeline, a series of strict conditions he had to meet if he ever wanted to have a relationship with me again.
First, he had to get a job. Any job. He had to learn the value of earning his own salary, of feeling the ache in his back after a long day's work, of standing on his own 2 feet without my financial safety net. Second, he had to enter intensive therapy to confront the deep-seated issues of entitlement, jealousy, and insecurity that had led him down this dark path. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he was to write me a letter, once a week, by hand, not to ask for anything, not to apologize again, but simply to document his progress, his thoughts, his struggles. It was a way for him to be accountable, primarily to himself. For the first few months, I heard nothing. A painful silence stretched on, and I had to steel myself for the very real possibility that he would reject the path, that the son I knew was truly gone forever, lost in a wilderness of his own making. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, the first letter arrived. It was a single sheet of plain paper, folded into a simple envelope. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. The letter was short, awkward, and stripped of all his usual bluster. He had found a job at a large garden center on the outskirts of the city, potting plants and loading heavy bags of soil into customers' cars. He wrote that his back hurt and his hands were covered in blisters, but that the work was honest. He signed it simply, Richard. The letters kept coming, every week, punctual as the tide. He wrote about his therapy sessions, about the difficult, painful process of looking at his own failings without flinching, without blaming his wife or his upbringing or his bad luck. He wrote about the simple, unexpected pride he felt upon receiving his first paycheck, small as it was. He wrote about learning the names of different plants, about the satisfaction of seeing something grow under his care. He never asked for a thing. He never made excuses. For the first time in his adult life, he was taking responsibility. I didn't write back. Not yet. It was crucial that he did this for himself, not for my approval. I was watching from a distance, letting his actions, not his words, speak for him. I read every letter, and with each one, a tiny, frozen part of my heart began to thaw. On my 72nd birthday, exactly 18 months after that terrible day, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Richard standing on my porch. He was thinner than I'd ever seen him, and there were new lines etched around his eyes, lines of hardship, not dissipation. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, but a simple, clean collared shirt and jeans. In his hands, he held not a lavish, store-bought bouquet, but a small terracotta pot with a single, exquisitely blooming gardenia plant. "I potted it myself," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "The soil mix is my own blend. Happy birthday, Mom." My heart, which I had guarded so fiercely for so long, felt a distinct, undeniable flicker of warmth. "Richard," I said, my own voice a little unsteady. "It's beautiful. Thank you." I stepped aside and let him into my home. The conversation was stilted at first, awkward. He talked about the challenges of pest control and rhododendrons. I talked about the migrating patterns of the local seabirds. We were like two strangers from different countries, cautiously trying to find a common language. But underneath the awkwardness, there was a foundation of honesty that had never been there before. Finally, after a long silence, he looked at me, his eyes clear and filled with a profound, painful sincerity that he could never have faked. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I know I can never take back what I did. I know sorry is a useless word. I destroyed everything. Our family, your trust, everything. I was weak and I was a coward and I was a fool, poisoned by my own ego and by other people. I don't expect you to ever forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be a son you don't have to be ashamed of." Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in my eyes, the first I had shed for him in a long, long time. They weren't tears of pity or even of sadness. They were tears of a fragile, tentative hope. The son I had lost, the boy I had loved, was finally, slowly finding his way back. "The first step, Richard," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "is to forgive yourself." Our journey was far from over. Trust, once so completely shattered, takes a lifetime to rebuild, piece by tiny piece. But for the first time, it felt possible. He stayed for another hour, and we talked, really talked for the first time in years. When he left, I was not alone. I was a woman who had fought a war and won. But more than that, I was a mother who was witnessing the first fragile bloom of redemption. I stood at my window for a long time watching his modest, second-hand car drive away until it was just a speck on the horizon. The gardenia plant sat on my table, its sweet, clean fragrance filling the room. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true love isn't about boundless, blind sacrifice. It's about boundaries. It's about self-respect. It's about having the strength to let go of what is toxic and the grace to allow for a new, healthier beginning. My real inheritance wasn't something I would leave behind in a will. It was the strength, the resilience, and the hard-won wisdom I now carried inside me. And that was something no one could ever take away. Thank you all for listening to my story. It means the world to me. It reminds me that even after the darkest storm, there is always the promise of a new dawn. Please continue to share your stories and support for one another in the comments. Your voices are a powerful reminder that we are never truly alone.